Hey everybody, DreamRoom64 here, and today's video is all about input lag on plasmas. And I have now 6 plasmas. I have a Time Sleuth, and I have now the knowledge too to accurately report input lag and how to measure it, so I'll explain all that in this video. Let me just quickly introduce you to the plasmas. So up here I have a 2006 plasma, the very common model called the PX60. I've shown this in a couple videos now. The input lag measurements, I wrote them down under this sticky note here. They're really going to surprise you. Get to that shortly. Down here is a budget Samsung from 2013, second to last year that they made these things. This is an F4500 720p 51-inch plasma, very thin, very lightweight, about 40 pounds. A pretty interesting model. I have it on an aftermarket stand here. But the input lag measurements on this are quite different from the other ones. And then over here, I have an ST60. Many people regard the ST60 from Panasonic as the best plasma ever, but it does have high input lag, and that's pretty well documented online. But I actually got a little bit different measurements than people have documented online. And again, I need to explain my methodology because I think I found what makes the most sense for calculating input lag and properly, fairly accurately reporting it on plasmas. All right, and then down here I have a flagship Pioneer Kuro model Pro 101 FD. A lot of people would say this is the best plasma ever. I mean, I think it depends on your use case, but bottom line is that this is awesome, and input lag is better on this one. We'll talk about that in a minute. Before we get to that, let me just explain some theory on how frames come across the screen and how the Time Sleuth reports input lag, because we need to understand these fundamentals before we progress. Okay, so to really understand how to properly measure input lag, we need to understand how does a frame get output on the screen. So on a CRT in super slow motion, you can actually observe this. I'll show you some footage. It's not going to be slow enough that you'll really see it. But basically the frame starts at the top left, scans to the right, and then goes and does the same thing, hundreds of lines down the screen in what's called a roster scan. This is a pattern. And the result of all this is that you actually have higher input lag at the bottom of the screen. So you have, where the frame completes, you have the maximum amount of input lag here. Midway through the screen, you have half a frame of lag, a medium amount of lag. And at the top left corner, that's where the frame was very fresh. And you have, well, I'll show you, I'll write it on here. You have 0 milliseconds of lag from the refresh rate. So 0.00 milliseconds, you get 8.33 milliseconds of lag here, and you get 16.6 repeating milliseconds. Now, if you're wondering where those numbers came from, it's a really simple calculation. A millisecond is obviously 1,000. There's obviously 1,000 milliseconds every second. So we take 1,000 milliseconds divided by, let's say 60 frames per second, which is our ideal frame rate on retro games, and you get 16.6 repeating. So that's one frame of lag. So basically, every frame, there's 16.6666 milliseconds until the next one appears. And like I just said, the frames are drawn on the screen in this roster scan pattern. And what the result is, even on a lag-free CRT, you have half a frame of lag in the middle and a full frame of lag at the bottom of the screen, the very bottom corner. Now, this is not display lag. This is not lag attributable to the display technology. However, when you use the Time Sleuth and you hold it onto the screen and measure input lag, it's going to report roughly these numbers. So on my CRT, which is lag-free, I got a measurement of 7 milliseconds here. I got a measurement of really close to 0, but not exactly 0 here, because I didn't have the test point perfectly aligned with the top corner. And then at the bottom corner, I got a measurement around 14 milliseconds, because again, didn't have that test point perfectly aligned. But hopefully you get the idea that this kind of lag is unavoidable. It is picked up by the Time Sleuth, but we can't call it display lag. So I am going to subtract this out when we talk about measurements from a plasma. On a normal display, you'd simply take the Time Sleuth and you'd hold it up to the top right corner of the screen, and you could generally call that your input lag measurement. But on a plasma, what I'll do is I'll take all 3 of these measurements, and you'll see plasma measures the same at all 3 of these points. But we have to subtract 8.33 from the middle test point, 16.66 from the bottom right test point, and nothing from the top left. And then we average those three, and the result of that simple math there, that subtracting those three values and taking the average, is that we could instead just take the any measurement on screen, subtract 8.33 milliseconds, and call that the display lag attributable to the plasma, TV, or monitor. So that's how I calculate how many milliseconds of lag plasma has. And hopefully that makes sense. This is something that when you find somebody's post online where they say how much lag a plasma has, they're not typically going to take that into account. I think that for a proper comparison and to properly report display lag, we really have to do that. So this is still part of your overall input lag, this refresh rate, this lag that comes from the refresh rate, but it's unavoidable. There's no way around it. So let me know if you have any questions on that. You have to understand this before I go on and talk more about the measurements that I reported. In my explanation there, I failed to mention a couple basics about the Time Sleuth. You can see here it has this little knob here that lets you change the output resolution to test how different resolutions may perform. Also the Time Sleuth, it puts on the screen 6 different test points. So you're going to have top left, middle left, bottom left. Same thing over on the right side, 6 points in total. And plasma is unusual in that all 6 test points are going to give you the same reading. CRT doesn't do that, LCD doesn't do that, OLED doesn't do that. All those technologies will give you a lower readout at the top and the maximum readout along the bottom, particularly in the bottom right and the top left being the min and max. Plasma isn't like that. I believe DLP is the same. So we had to treat plasma a little bit differently. We had to do that half a frame subtraction to really get to the bottom of what is display lag when we use the Time Sleuth to measure it. So all the measurements I'm providing, I do that. All right, with that explanation out of the way, let's talk input lag measurements now that we have a decent understanding. All right, so I wrote them down here, and this one is a shocker. This is the 2006 PX60, 37-inch model. 1.3 frames of lag, a display lag, across the board, even at 480i and 1080i. Really unusual, shockingly low, almost hard to believe. I'll show you some footage of me measuring it. Really impressive. And now I did also read a rumor about this thing that it would have half that lag over the component video input. And I tested it with my lag-free component video converter, and I basically got the same exact measurements over the component video inputs. So that rumor is not true, but it is good to know that over HDMI or over component, you get this extremely low lag. And honestly, to me, this is imperceptible. I think if you can really feel that, I have a hard time really believing it. All right, anyway, let's go down here. So this one is, again, the 2013 Samsung. Not something you hear too much people talking about. People will talk about the F8500 Samsung, but you won't really hear them talking about the F4500 bottom of the line. This one's interesting. So this one actually has variable lag, so that's why I wrote really small here. I wrote down the highest input lag of the variable input lags. So it's close to 3 at 1080p, but under 3, but that's the maximum. So the input lag actually slowly goes from high to low and just keeps going lower until it jumps back up to the high point. So I don't know why that is, but I actually have a Samsung LCD TV from 2008, I think, a flagship LCD. It does the same thing. It's the TV that I spent all my college years gaming on, and despite the variable lag on that one, which I didn't even know about, I knew it had lag, I didn't know what it was, I could game on it just fine. And on this one as well, I can game on it just fine. I tried some Super Mario Bros. Very slightly, I could feel it, but not by much. So check it out. So 2.8 down to 1.9 frames of lag. Not good to use it for 1080i, because I think the tipping point for me is about 3 frames. Once you go over 3 frames, you really start to feel it. At the 3 frame mark, I can kind of feel it on the right game. So a lot of games I don't feel it. 720p is good on this. 480p is also really nice. This thing really looks good for 480p despite its strange resolution. It scales internally very well, and then 480i is pretty high. All right, let's take a look at this one, the ST60. Notorious for its poor input lag. Get ready for this. This is not good. This one measures at 4.1 frames, 6 frames on 1080i. That's abysmal. And it gets even worse. Like if you have the wrong settings enabled on this thing, the input lag goes to 90 or 120. Absolutely horrendous. It's so bad that when you're watching a movie, your audio, the lip sync goes out of whack, and you need to compensate for that. So this is beautiful, beautiful picture on the ST60, but the input lag really does mess up. Now, certain games, four frames of lag really isn't that bad. A lot of games actually, but then there's also a lot of games where you feel that heaviness, and it really does ruin the experience. Because remember, again, I said my tipping point, just from my experience playing on all these plasmas over the past month and a half, is that 3 seems to be my tipping point. 4 is where it's like you're wearing 40-pound boots on your feet when you're walking around. 3 frames of lag is like maybe you're wearing 5-pound shoes, if it makes any sense. But yeah, an interesting model, beautiful picture. I think I'm going to use it mainly for movies. It's a 3D model, and this is the first, I ordered some 3D glasses. This is the first thing I'm going to watch, Shrek, and then I'm going to check out Titanic in 3D. Never seen it in 3D, so that should be kind of fun. I might give an update on how that turns out. All right, and then over here, the flagship Pioneer Kuro Signature Series, best model ever. Here's the input lag on this one. So I consider 2.6 at 1080p to be acceptable. And then you see I have 2 measurements here. It has a PC mode and then a video mode, and I got different measurements depending on what mode I had in. So your settings on the TV, or monitor in this case, greatly affect the input lag. And not always, but sometimes. And then TVs also have game mode, and then the game mode doesn't even change the measurements from my experience. Now, for some reason, at one point I was getting this same 2.6 frames of lag measurement down the board, and I must have changed something. And then the other resolutions, the lower resolutions, all shot up in measurement. But yeah, this thing will read 52 milliseconds on screen, but remember the math I explained. You have to subtract 8.33 from the number reported by the Time Sleuth, and then take that number, divide by 16.667 milliseconds of lag per frame, and then that's how I calculate 2.6. So 2.6, it really isn't that bad. The picture on this thing, once I dial it in, is going to be so beautiful. It's actually worth playing on still. All right, so that's the plasma monitors and TVs up here. Let's go take a look downstairs. I have 2 more to show you, and a little bit more of my thoughts on input lag and how I perceive input lag. And, does it ruin games? Are we focusing too much on it? All right, let's jump downstairs. All right, now let's take a look at this one down here. This is a Panasonic S30. So it's an S model. It doesn't have 3D. If it were ST, it'd be the 3D model. This is a low budget model, but it is a 1080p model, and from 2011. So this S30, get ready for this, is the best out of all of them. Even very slightly better than the PX60. 1.2 frames of lag on all inputs, all resolutions. So same as the PX60, it is super low. Very impressive. And on this, it's truly, I truly don't feel it at all. I've played Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario Bros. On this. It feels like I'm playing on a CRT. The motion clarity is phenomenal on this model. So I really like this one. Great for gaming. 42 inches, a nice size. All right, now over here, this one doesn't need much of an introduction. I talked about this one a lot in my previous videos. It's the 480p model from 2003. Now this one, the measurements are not so good. Check this out. 4 frames of lag at 1080i, just under 3. It's actually 2.94, and this is 2.95. These are basically identical, 720p and 480p measurements. So yeah, that's not great, but the reality is that with the games I've played on it, I don't perceive that lag. I'm not playing Super Mario Bros. On this thing, and like I said, 3 frames of lag is really my tipping point, where it still feels good. You go higher than that, it starts to feel bad. But even at 480i, close to 4 frames on this plasma, I'll explain a couple games that I played that felt totally fine to me, and it's going to surprise you. So let's go over to the shelf, and we will take a quick look over here. So Guitar Hero, that's a game, runs at 480i, but despite that, and having nearly 4 frames of lag, I can play it perfectly on that plasma, and it feels great. Now the reason for that is the way I play rhythm games. So when I play a rhythm game, I'm not looking at that top bar or that bottom bar and trying to time my strums, button presses or steps with that bar. I'm actually looking halfway down the screen typically and getting the note information there, and then just matching the rhythm I'm playing. So with 4 frames of lag, believe it or not, I can play perfectly fine on rhythm games perfectly fine. And that also applied to the ST60. I tried Guitar Hero last night on the ST60 with its massive 4.1 frames of lag. I was doing great. It didn't affect me at all, even with no lag compensation, because I had lag-free audio. So I had no audio processing that was messing it up. And I still had the speed of sound was probably the only thing slowing me down. Speed of sound actually is slow enough to add a few milliseconds, depending on how, or several milliseconds, depending on how far you're sitting away. So interesting thing to consider, but yeah, you have to consider also not just your video lag, but your audio lag, which if you can get your audio lag to 0 and your display has a few frames of lag, my finding is that it doesn't mess up the rhythm game experience. All right, so the same thing applied to Parappa the Rapper. That's another 480i game on the PS2. Rhythm game, I could play it perfectly fine. It looked beautiful. The 40p plasma does a beautiful job de-interlacing it, and it just goes great. Now, where 4 frames of lag becomes problematic is when I'm playing a game, like I said, Super Mario Bros. I think it's the ultimate litmus test. Now, the reason Super Mario Bros. And then also the Donkey Kong Country games for me are my test material is because these games, they're platformers where there's a run button. And when there's a run button, you have momentum. And you know how you can manipulate Mario's movement or Donkey Kong or Diddy Kong's movement by pressing the opposite direction on the D-pad after you jump. And again, there's just this fast, fluid motion to these games, a lot of momentum. You really feel the drag when there's input lag. So they're still playable, but just it's not as fun. You'll miss some jumps. On the other hand, I was surprised. I played this on the ST60 with this massive 4.1 frames of lag, a Shantae game. It's a 2D platformer, but it's very different than the Donkey Kong and Mario platformers where you have all that momentum. Shantae doesn't have a run button, and I find that it actually feels surprisingly really good, even with all that input lag. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that, yes, sometimes input lag ruins gaming experiences. The 4 frames is absolutely problematic. For me, like I said, the 3 frames is the tipping point. But then when you get into something with 1.2 or 1.3 frames of lag, like this 1.2 across every resolution, or the PX60 with 1.3 across every resolution, or the F4500, which has variable lag, but it gets pretty low at 1.9 to 2.8. They feel really good. They absolutely don't ruin the game experience. This one, with its wonderful motion clarity and that low lag, I truly can't perceive it. So I think as gamers, we need to worry a little bit less about input lag. We need to think about display lag as it's part of the total experience of lag, and you want to minimize it generally, but I don't think we need to necessarily obsess over it if we're just guys trying to enjoy playing some games at night as a hobby. Now, if gaming is your livelihood, you're a professional esports player, don't play on a plasma. Don't show up to a fighting game tournament with a plasma TV, obviously. But for the most part, it truly doesn't ruin the experience. So let me know your guys' thoughts on input lag, your experiences gaming on plasmas, any questions you have, any thoughts on the method that I took to measure input lag. I'm curious to hear them, and give me any other ideas you might have for the next video. So thanks for watching this. So hopefully it all made sense, and hopefully see you in the next one. All right, bye.